Today on Assigned Christian at Birth, we're diving into history. We'll be covering 5 reasons as to why Southern California is so Christian. As someone with roots in this area, the topic has always been extremely interesting to me, and it's been really enlightening to discover why Christianity has such a stronghold within the roots of my family. Maybe yours is similar, or maybe you just like learning new things about religion in the United States. Either way, I'm glad you're here. I'm Andy, and my pronouns are they, them. I'll be your guide throughout this list, so let's get into it. Colonizers gonna colonize. The roots of Christianity in Southern California can be traced back to the Spanish colonization of the region in the 18th century. Spanish missionaries, primarily Franciscan friars like Junipero Serra, established 8 of the 21 missions throughout California, starting with the mission San Diego de Alcala in 1769. These missions aimed to convert indigenous people to Catholicism, specifically of the Roman Catholic variety, which really set the tone for embedding Christianity as a whole into the region's early history. While Serra's goal was to convert the indigenous people due to his belief that their souls needed saving, many of these people centuries later have pushed back on his canonization as a saint by the Catholic Church, pointing out that the priest directed and approved of the torture and enslavement of natives at missions that served as both religious and military installations. This is absolutely true. That absolutely happened. Serra wrote that spiritual fathers should punish their sons, the Indians, with blows appears to be as old as the conquest of the Americas, so general in fact that the saints do not seem to be any exception to the rule. He claimed that punishment made clear to the natives that we, every one of us, came here for the single purpose of doing them good and their eternal salvation. Ew, Jesus, gross. Bible Belt migrants. Just before the outbreak of World War II, many migrants from the South headed for Los Angeles in search of steady jobs within the city's car, plane, and rubber factories. 320,000 people came to Los Angeles in 1941 alone, and they found employment within the same gargantuan plants that were now being used as armories funded by the government. Darren Dochuk tells us in his book, From Bible Belt to Sun Belt, that in 1940, Washington was already sending $1.3 billion per year to the economy of California, and that by 1945 that number hit $8.5 billion, a nearly 600% rise. He writes that due to the region's favor with Washington, the wallets of Southern Californians expanded the quickest, and at that time, 40% of Los Angeles residents had paychecks signed by Uncle Sam. Dochuk explains, whether as young men and women yearning for independence, middle-aged males fleeing farms for steady factory work, or families looking for stability, they came west with the notable optimism and resolve. For many of these self-identified plain folk, such hope was fortified by a powerful sense of mission conveyed to them from the pulpits of their churches. Rooted in a popular narrative long embraced by white Anglo-American Protestants and accentuated by the experiences of their own trailblazing parents who had first settled the territory west of the Mississippi River, these white Southern evangelicals envisioned themselves as pilgrims carrying out their own errand into the wilderness. Theirs, of course, was a modern sort of frontier and an unusual kind of wilderness, but it was a borderland just the same that called forth the urge to civilize. Aided by their unassailable confidence, as well as Los Angeles's decentralized and unregulated layout, they found freedom to graft their notions of Christianity, individuality, and community onto the land. In the process, they served notice to their neighbors that they had come west not looking for salvation, but to impart it. If you've made it this far, please leave the video a like. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Jesus and Jefferson. Long before Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes-Dumais was published, there was Jesus and Jefferson, the 2 men that Western Southerners revered the most. Dochuk explains this affinity for the 3rd president of the United States as inspired by the mythologized ideal of Thomas Jefferson's virtuous yeoman farmer. He writes that the 19th century Southern plain folk preferred a contained world in which the local community met all of their needs, a product of frontier thinking. Jeffersonian democracy naturally found fertile cultural soil west of the Mississippi. Dochuk goes on to explain that the dialect of being Southern and Western, of wanting to preserve and create, defend and advance, not only motivated them in their personal quests for fruitful lives, but led them to believe collectively that they and their plain folk Americanism held the keys to a better society. The commanding influence of evangelicalism assured them of this conviction, shaped by the conservatism and communalism of Southern evangelicalism, but radicalized by their encounter with the boundless frontier frontier, Christian citizens living west of the Mississippi believed that their true calling was to advance the Christian heritage passed down to them from their Anglo-Saxon or Scotch-Irish ancestors, not simply to just preserve it. Plain folk pioneers thus became pilgrims burdened with the responsibility of evangelizing and civilizing, initially on the godless borderland of the Western South, then in the dark, secular reaches of Southern California. Church equals community. When these migrants left their former communities for the Los Angeles area, many of them settled in modest communities like Van Nuys in the Valley and Santa Ana in Orange County. Other places like Bell Gardens, Maywood, and Southgate all succumbed to a postmodern pattern of sprawl. Within these new communities, migrants longed for home and belonging, and church was one of the easiest ways to find both of those things. It was during the last stages of the Great Depression that Southern evangelicals learned to lean heavily on their churches for community and support, a practice that they continued after their trek west. Dochuk tells us that funneling into this fragmented frontier, hundreds of thousands of white Southerners encountered a centerless grid, a milieu that allowed them to adjust to urban life without abandoning their cultural rituals. Yearning for familiarity, they began constructing churches and establishing congregations that reflected the demographics of their towns in the South. Since blue-collar suburbia allowed groups of migrants to settle in the same neighborhoods, entire communities quickly sorted themselves by faith. It was not unusual for churches to gain reputations for being archy or oaky, and entire neighborhoods to become classified as Pentecostal, Baptist, or Church of Christ hotbeds. The John Birch Society. The John Birch Society, or JBS, is a far-right political organization founded in 1958 by businessman Robert W. Welch, Jr. It gained significant influence in the United States during the 1960s for advocating staunch anti-communism, limited government, and the defense of what it viewed as American values. The organization is named after John Birch, a U.S. military intelligence officer that was killed by Chinese communists in 1945. Birch became a martyr figure for the society, symbolizing anti-communist resistance. JBS and evangelicalism were connected through their shared ideological commitments, particularly in terms of their anti-communism, social conservatism, and opposition to progressive movements. While JBS was primarily a political organization, its influence extended into religious circles, especially among politically conservative evangelicals. For evangelicals, communism was not just a political issue, but also a spiritual one, as they associated it with atheism and the suppression of religious freedom. The JBS framed communism as an existential threat to American society, echoing this fear within evangelical communities. The JBS found support among white Christian residents in Orange County who were concerned about communism, progressive social movements, like the civil rights and feminist movements, of course, and what they saw as a decline in traditional American values. The county became known for its conservative grassroots activism, which aligned with the JBS's efforts to mobilize local chapters and influence local politics. Southern California, despite its reputation as a progressive region in some areas, had pockets of strong resistance to the civil rights movement, especially among white suburban conservatives. Comes as a surprise to no one, I'm sure. The JBS viewed the civil rights movement as a communist plot to destabilize the country, and this message resonated with segments of the population who were either outright segregationists or opposed to federal interventions in social policy. The society's opposition to civil rights aligned with local conservative concerns about the changing racial dynamics of Southern California, particularly as Black folks moved into previously all-white neighborhoods. The JBS contributed to the broader conservative movement that gained momentum in Southern California, influencing groups and individuals who would later become key players in the Christian right and the New Right movements of the 1970s and 1980s. Ronald Reagan's political rise was rooted in Southern California's conservative base, which included many former JBS members or sympathizers, although Reagan himself rejected the JBS's more extreme views. The region's conservative infrastructure, which had been built in part by JBS activism, provided a foundation for Reagan's political career and the conservative resurgence in American politics. If you learned something today, leave me a like, and if you want to see part 2 on 5 more reasons why Southern California is so Christian, let me know in the comments. A lot of what I learned for this video was from Darren Dochuk's book From Bible Belt to Sun Belt that I was quoting from throughout this video. I highly recommend it if you're interested in a deep dive on this topic. Super fascinating. Thank you all for being here and for watching. I'll catch you next time. Okay, bye!